The wind howled like a hungry wolf outside my tent. A flash of lightning lit up the thin nylon walls, turning my small space into a ghostly white room for just a second. Then, darkness returned, deeper and more complete than before. Thunder cracked right overhead, a deafening explosion that made my teeth rattle in my head. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling my sleeping bag up to my chin. My name is Alex, and I was a photographer. I had come to Blackwood Forest to take pictures of rare night-blooming flowers. Now, all I wanted was to be home, safe in my own bed, far away from this terrifying storm. This was a bad idea, a very bad idea. I had checked the weather forecast before I left. It said clear skies for the whole week. The forecast was wrong, so very wrong. Rain hammered down on the tent, sounding like 1,000 tiny fists trying to get in. A branch snapped somewhere nearby, a loud crack that sounded like a breaking bone. I flinched, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Was it just the storm, or was something else out there moving through the trees? I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination running wild. But the feeling of being watched, of not being alone, was a cold knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind ripped through the campsite. I heard a tearing sound, sharp and final. Cold rain sprayed across my face. One of the tent poles had snapped clean in half and the fabric was tearing away. My shelter was collapsing around me, leaving me exposed to the full fury of the storm. Water was already pooling on the floor, soaking my sleeping bag and my camera gear. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to find real shelter, a real building. Something with strong walls and a solid roof that wouldn't be torn apart by the wind. I had to move, and I had to move now. With my heart racing, I scrambled out of the ruined tent into the pouring rain. The wind pushed against me, trying to knock me off my feet. I grabbed my backpack, which held my camera and a flashlight, and slung it over my shoulder. Everything else was lost to the storm. I clicked on my flashlight, its weak beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness. The trees looked like skeletal giants, their branches clawing at the stormy sky. I had no idea which way to go. I just picked a direction and started walking, hoping, praying that I would find something. Anything. The forest was a maze of black trees and deep shadows. Every step was a struggle. Mud sucked at my boots, trying to pull me down. Thorny branches reached out like grasping fingers, scratching at my clothes and my skin. The rain was relentless, plastering my hair to my forehead and blurring my vision. My flashlight beam danced wildly with every unsteady step, making the shadows jump and twist into monstrous shapes. Was that a face in the bark of that old oak tree? Did I just see something move at the edge of the light? I kept telling myself it was just the storm playing tricks on my eyes, but the fear was real. I must have been walking for an hour, maybe more. Time seemed to stretch and warp in the darkness. I was cold, soaked to the bone, and so tired. My legs ached with every step. I was starting to lose hope. Maybe I would just wander around in circles until I collapsed. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I had to keep going. I couldn't give up. I thought about my warm bed at home, my mum's cooking, my dog, Buster. I had to get back to them. I pushed the fear down and forced myself to take another step, and then another. That's when I saw it. Through the sheets of rain, a dark shape loomed ahead. It was a silhouette, darker than the surrounding trees. A structure. It was a cabin. A small, old wooden cabin, standing all by itself in the middle of nowhere. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made my knees buckle. Shelter. I wasn't going to have to spend the night out in the storm after all. It looked abandoned, with dark windows that stared out like empty eyes. But I didn't care. Anything was better than being out here. I stumbled towards it, my legs finding a new burst of energy. The cabin was even older up close. The wood was dark and weathered, covered in moss and creeping vines. A crooked porch sagged in the front, and the door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I hesitated for only a moment. A creepy old cabin was still better than a raging storm. Pushing the creaking door open, I stepped inside, out of the wind and the rain. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust and damp wood. I shone my flashlight around the single room. It was empty, except for a rickety table, a broken chair, and a stone fireplace. I was safe, or so I thought. I closed the heavy door behind me, shutting out the roar of the storm. The silence inside the cabin was sudden and complete. It was a heavy kind of silence, the kind that presses in on you and makes your ears ring. All I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. The beam of my flashlight cut through the thick darkness, revealing floating dust particles dancing in the air. The room was small and bare. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like ghostly decorations, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. It looked like no one had been here for years. I shivered, though it wasn't just from the cold anymore. There was a strange feeling in the air, a feeling of being watched. I slowly swept my flashlight beam across the room again, checking every corner. Nothing, just the table, the chair and the fireplace. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It was as if invisible eyes were following my every move. I told myself I was just spooked from being in the storm. My mind was playing tricks on me. I took a deep breath and walked further into the room, my footsteps echoing unnervingly on the old wooden floorboards. Then I heard it, a sound. It was a whisper, so faint I thought I had imagined it. It sounded like the wind, but the storm was outside and the door was shut. I froze, holding my breath, listening. There it was again, a soft, sighing sound coming from the walls themselves. "Get out!" The words were not clear, more like a feeling, a thought that wasn't my own. My blood ran cold. I spun around, pointing my flashlight at the walls, but there was nothing there. Just old, rotting wood. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone here?" The only answer was the deep, oppressive silence. I tried to rationalize it. The wind must be getting in through cracks in the wood. That's all it was. Old houses make strange noises. But the feeling of dread was growing stronger with every passing second. I felt a strange presence in the room with me, a cold spot that seemed to move around. I saw a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow that darted away when I turned to look. My heart was a drum beating a frantic rhythm. I was no longer sure that coming into this cabin was a good idea. In fact, I was starting to think it was the worst mistake of my life. My flashlight beam landed on the dusty table in the center of the room. Lying there, half hidden under a thick coat of grime, was an old book. It was a journal, bound in cracked, faded leather. Curiosity got the better of my fear. Who would leave a journal behind in a place like this? I walked over to the table and picked it up. A cloud of dust puffed into the air, making me cough. I wiped the cover with the sleeve of my wet jacket. There was no name, no title, just the plain worn leather. I felt a strange pull towards the book, a feeling that I had to open it, had to read what was inside. I sat down on the dusty floor, my back against the cold stone of the fireplace, and opened the journal. The pages were yellow and brittle with age. The writing inside was a messy, hurried scrawl written in faded black ink. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago. It was written by someone who had also been caught in a storm and found this cabin. My eyes widened as I read. The writer described the same things I had just experienced: the howling wind, the dark forest, and the relief of finding this place. It was like reading my own story. As I read further, the entries became more frantic and fearful. The writer described the feeling of not being alone. They wrote about the whispers in the walls, the fleeting shadows in the corners of their vision, and the chilling sensation of being constantly watched by unseen eyes. "The cabin is not empty," one entry read. "There is something here with me. It watches. It waits. I can hear it scratching in the walls at night. A shiver traced its way down my spine. The words on the page mirrored the terror that was blooming in my own chest. This person had felt the exact same things I was feeling now. Suddenly I heard a sound that made me jump. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from the wall right behind my head. It was a dry, rasping sound, like long nails dragging slowly across wood. My breath hitched in my throat. I scrambled away from the fireplace, my eyes wide with terror. The scratching stopped. I stood in the middle of the room, trembling, clutching the journal to my chest. This wasn't my imagination, it was real. The journal was real, the scratching was real, the haunting was real, and I was trapped in here with it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight steady. The beam zigzagged across the dark room. I had to get out. I didn't care about the storm anymore. I ran to the door and pulled on the handle. It wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, rattling it in its frame, but it was stuck fast, as if it were sealed shut. Panic seized me. I was locked in, trapped. The whispering started again, louder this time, coming from all around me. "Stay with us, you belong here." The voices were clearer now, a chorus of ghostly sighs that seemed to seep out of the very wood of the cabin. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room. Shadows seemed to deepen in the corners, coalescing into tall, thin shapes that had no source. I felt their cold attention on me, a heavy pressure that made it hard to breathe. I opened the journal again, desperate for some kind of answer. I flipped to the very last page. The handwriting there was shaky, almost unreadable. It knows my name. It whispers my thoughts. I am becoming one of them. The house is writing my story now. My eyes flickered down to the bottom of the page, and then I saw it. Below the last frantic entry, new words were appearing. The ink was fresh. It was a dark, wet black, slowly soaking into the yellowed paper, and it was my own handwriting. "The storm is so loud. I found a cabin. I feel like I'm being watched." I stared in horror as the words continued to form on the page, describing everything that had happened to me, everything I had been thinking. I found a journal. Someone else was here. They were scared too. I hear scratching. The pen was not in my hand, but my story was being written. I was not just a visitor to this horror, I was becoming part of it. The journal fell from my numb fingers and landed on the floor with a soft thud. The shadows swirled closer, their whispers turning into a symphony of ghostly voices. They were all around me now, their cold presence a suffocating blanket. I could almost see their faces in the darkness, pale and hollow-eyed. They were the silent watchers, the ones who had been trapped here before, and now it was my turn. I closed my eyes as the voices and the shadows closed in. The next morning, the sun rose over a peaceful blackwood forest. The storm had passed. Inside the old cabin, all was still and quiet. The room was empty. On the dusty table, an old leather-bound journal lay open. A new final entry was written in neat, calm handwriting. The storm has ended. The cabin is quiet again, waiting for the next lost traveller to find their way here, waiting for the next story to be written.